My ambitious son-in-law looked me dead in the eye and demanded $800,000, convinced it was the price to keep my daughter's family intact. He smirked, believing the luxury Bay Area mansion I bought them was his ultimate leverage. But he forgot one crucial detail. I am not a bottomless bank account, and the property deed he so happily signed was never a wedding gift. It was a perfectly crafted legal noose. Hello, everyone. Before today's story begins, we'd like to share a quick message. YouTube recently removed our monetization, cutting off our income. If you enjoy this story, we humbly ask for just $1 to help pay our staff so they can make a living and keep creating for you. Thank you for saving us. Now let's begin the story. My name is Everly Hunter. I am 45 years old, and if there is one thing Silicon Valley respects, it is a woman who builds an empire from scratch. 2 decades ago, I had nothing but a rusted laptop and a relentless vision. Today, I am the founder and chief executive officer of Nexus Tech Solutions. I spent my life turning late nights and high-stakes gambles into a fortress of wealth, also my 24-year-old daughter Maya would never have to know the bitter taste of poverty. Maya was my sole vulnerability, a gentle and trusting soul who saw only the good in people. Then came Liam. Liam stepped into Maya's life like a perfectly tailored suit, smooth and seemingly flawless. He had the charm of a seasoned salesman and the practiced vocabulary of a Silicon Valley visionary. He spoke endlessly about his big ideas, disruption, and changing the world. To Maya, he was an ambitious genius. To me, he was a walking pitch deck. But I smiled and welcomed him into the family because my daughter looked at him as if he hung the stars. When they got married, I did what any fiercely protective mother with means would do. I opened my checkbook. I wanted my daughter to have a stable foundation, which meant helping her husband find his footing. His first startup idea required a seed investment of $50,000. I wrote the check without blinking. 6 months later, the company dissolved, and the money vanished into a void of market volatility and unexpected operational costs. Liam brushed it off with a charismatic smile, insisting that failure was just the first step to success. I believed him, or rather, I forced myself to believe him for Maya's sake. So I funded the next venture. Then the next. Over the course of 2 years, I poured hundreds of thousands of dollars into Liam's grand illusions. Slowly, subtly, I noticed a shift in the air. The heartfelt gratitude he displayed during our first financial arrangement evaporated. It was replaced by a quiet, insidious expectation. He stopped presenting business plans and started tossing invoices onto my mahogany desk as if my office were a personal bank branch he had exclusive rights to. He treated my wealth like a bottomless trust fund meant to cushion his ego. Whenever I hesitated or asked for basic financial reports, he would expertly twist the narrative, sighing heavily and looking at me with feigned disappointment. "I thought we were family, Everly," he would say, his voice thick with manipulation. "Maya is going to be so heartbroken to hear you do not believe in our future." That subtle emotional blackmail was the ultimate warning sign, but I swallowed my pride. I wanted to give him one final, undeniable push toward independence. I decided to purchase a sprawling, breathtaking estate in the San Francisco Bay Area. It cost several $1,000,000, an exorbitant sum even for me, but it was massive enough to serve as a beautiful home for Maya and a modern headquarters for Liam's supposedly booming new tech firm. When I handed them the keys, Liam practically vibrated with triumph. He viewed the deed as a conquest, a testament to his ability to extract exactly what he wanted from me. What Liam did not know was that I did not build Nexus Tech Solutions by being naive. I instructed my corporate lawyers to embed a highly specific, irrevocable commercial forfeiture clause deep within the property contract. On the surface, the house belonged to them. Legally, any proven financial fraud or criminal negligence tied to the property's commercial operations would immediately revert 100% of the ownership back to my holding company. Liam never read the fine print. His arrogance blinded him to the possibility that the woman signing the checks might be sharper than the man cashing them. For a few months, the facade held. They threw lavish parties in the Bay Area home, and Liam played the role of a successful tech magnate perfectly. But the illusion began to crack on a cold, rain-swept Tuesday evening. I was sitting alone in my home office, reviewing the quarterly statements of my secondary accounts, the ones loosely connected to the initial business accounts I had set up for Maya and Liam. My eyes caught a massive discrepancy. A sudden, unauthorized withdrawal of $75,000 had been routed through a shadow account, leaving no paper trail other than a vague international wire code. My heart pounded against my ribs as the glow of the monitor illuminated the silent room. This was not a business expense. This was not a failed startup cost. The perfect family facade was fracturing right before my eyes, and as I stared at the flashing cursor on my screen, I knew a violent storm was about to hit my doorstep. The morning after I discovered the missing funds, the atmosphere in my top-floor office at Nexus Tech Solutions felt suffocating. I stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, staring out at the sprawling Silicon Valley skyline, trying to process the betrayal. Before I could even pick up the phone to summon my legal team, the heavy oak doors of my private sanctuary burst open without a single knock. I turned around, my defensive instincts instantly flaring. My executive assistant stood in the doorway, her face pale with panic, apologizing profusely. I raised a single hand to silence her. My eyes locked on the two figures who had just barged into my domain. Liam strode across the plush carpet with the unearned swagger of a conqueror returning from battle. His jaw was set tight and his eyes carried a cold, calculating gleam that I had never seen before. Behind him, trailing like a frightened shadow, was Maya. My brilliant, beautiful daughter looked completely diminished. She wore an oversized sweater. Her shoulders slumped and her eyes were fixed firmly on the floorboards as if terrified to meet my gaze. Liam did not wait for an invitation. He threw himself into one of the leather guest chairs opposite my desk, crossing his legs with arrogant ease. He slapped a thick, heavily bound manila folder onto the pristine surface of my desk. The sound echoed in the quiet room like a gunshot. "We need to have a very serious conversation about Capital Everly," Liam announced, his voice devoid of the usual syrupy charm he reserved for me. There was no greeting, no forced smile. The mask was completely gone. I walked slowly back to my leather chair, keeping my posture perfectly rigid. "I am in the middle of a workday, Liam, and you do not barge into my office throwing paperwork at me. What is this?" "That is the survival of my company?" he sneered, leaning forward and tapping the thick folder with his index finger. "We have hit a temporary cash flow bottleneck. I need an immediate capital injection to stabilize operations and push the new software update. $800,000. Wired by the end of business today." I stared at him, genuinely wondering if he had lost his mind. He was demanding nearly $1 million with the casual tone of someone asking for a cup of coffee. Before I could even formulate a response to his sheer audacity, Liam leaned back, folding his arms across his chest. "But that is just the short-term fix. We also need to discuss long-term alignment. I am done playing the struggling founder while you sit up here in your glass tower. I want a seat at the adult table. I require a 15% equity stake in Nexus Tech Solutions." The silence that followed his demand was deafening. 15%. He wanted a massive slice of the empire I had built with my own blood, sweat, and tears over 2 decades. Simply because he managed to put a ring on my daughter's finger. "You have completely lost your grip on reality," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous, icy whisper. "You will not see another dime from me, let alone a piece of my company. You are out of your mind." Liam let out a harsh, mocking laugh. "Am I? Because the way I see it, you owe me this, Everly. Do you have any idea how much of my own potential I have sacrificed to babysit your daughter? I put my prime years on hold to cater to her emotional fragility. I am the one managing her life, so you can sit up here and play the untouchable chief executive. You owe me compensation for my time and my sacrifices." My stomach twisted into violent knots. I shifted my gaze to Maya. She was sitting rigidly in the chair next to him, her hands trembling in her lap. "Maya," I pleaded, my voice cracking under the weight of my heartbreak. "Maya, look at me. Do you hear what he is saying about you? Are you going to let him speak to me this way?" Maya flinched. She opened her mouth, a silent gasp escaping her lips. But Liam shot her a side-eye so full of venom that she instantly shut it down. She lowered her head even further, completely subdued. The sight of my strong, vibrant girl, reduced to a terrified hostage in her own marriage, shattered my heart into 1,000 pieces. Then Liam played his final fatal card. "She is not going to save you, Everly, and neither is your stubbornness," he said, his tone turning venomous. "You are going to sign the wire transfer and the equity papers, because if you do not, I will make sure the media gets a very interesting anonymous tip. You know how fragile investor confidence is. It would be a real tragedy if rumors started circulating about toxic leadership, financial instability, and family lawsuits involving the great Nexus Tech Solutions. Your stock would plummet 20% by tomorrow morning. I can destroy your life's work with one phone call." He smiled, a wide, predatory grin, entirely convinced he had backed me into a corner from which I could not escape. He thought he was negotiating with a frightened mother. He forgot he was dealing with a woman who had survived the ruthless corporate warfare of Silicon Valley. I stood up slowly. I did not yell. I did not show him a single ounce of the searing rage boiling in my veins. I calmly reached out, picked up his heavy unread folder, and dropped it straight into the metal trash can beside my desk. "No," I said, one single unyielding word. Liam's triumphant grin vanished instantly. His face flushed a dark, violent shade of crimson. He jumped to his feet, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "You arrogant, selfish witch!" he spat, pointing a shaking finger at me. "You think you can dismiss me? You think you are untouchable? I gave you a chance to do this the easy way. You are going to pay dearly for this. I will burn your entire world to the ground." He stormed toward the door, grabbing Maya by the elbow and yanking her up roughly. He dragged her out of my office, slamming the heavy doors behind them with enough force to rattle the glass walls. I stood alone in the deafening silence of my office. He wanted to burn my world down. But what Liam did not realize was that he had just declared war on a woman who was forged in fire, and I was going to ensure that he was the only one who turned to ash. The heavy oak doors had barely settled into their frames before the adrenaline left my system, replaced by a cold, crawling sense of dread. Liam's threat was not just the temper tantrum of a thwarted child. It was the desperate flailing of a drowning man. Men like him did not demand nearly $1 million on a Tuesday morning unless they were already backed against a wall. I reached for my phone and dialed the one number I reserved for absolute emergencies. "Marcus," I said when the deep voice answered on the second ring. "I need you to assemble the hounds. Bring the forensic team. We are opening the books on my son-in-law." Marcus Vance was not just a corporate attorney. He was a legal predator who thrived on tearing apart fraudulent empires. Within 3 hours, he had transformed my private conference room into a financial war room. A team of 6 forensic accountants worked through the night, tracing every single cent I had ever handed to Liam. I sat at the head of the table, sipping black coffee, watching as they meticulously dismantled the illusion my daughter had married. It took exactly 48 hours for the first terrifying truth to surface. Marcus walked into my office on Thursday morning looking grim. He dropped a neatly organized binder onto my desk, a stark contrast to the chaotic folder Liam had thrown at me days prior. "There is no company, Everly," Marcus said, his voice flat. "There never was." I opened the binder, staring at lines of bank statements and routing numbers. "What do you mean there is no company?" "He has an office. He has business expenses. He has an expensive lease and a shell corporation," Marcus corrected, leaning over to point at a highlighted column. "No payroll. No software development. No product. Every single dollar you gave him for his grand startup was funneled through dummy accounts and dumped directly into underground syndicate gambling rings. High-stakes poker, offshore sports betting, and exorbitant tabs at underground VIP clubs. He is bleeding cash, Everly. He owes incredibly dangerous people a staggering amount of money." My breath caught in my throat. I had known he was incompetent, but I had never suspected he was a degenerate gambler entangled with the criminal underworld. But Marcus was not finished. He turned the page, and the air in the room suddenly grew freezing cold. "It gets worse," Marcus said quietly. "Because he ran out of your startup money months ago, he had to find new collateral to keep the loan sharks from breaking his legs. Look at this." He slid a heavily redacted document toward me. It was a promissory note for a loan of $3 million from an unlicensed lending group notorious for their brutal collection methods. My eyes scanned the page, stopping dead at the bottom. There, scrawled in blue ink, was my signature. He forged my name, I whispered, the reality of the betrayal making me physically nauseous. He did more than that, Marcus replied grimly. He used the San Francisco Bay Area mansion you bought them as the collateral. He submitted falsified documents claiming the property was fully in his name and leveraged it to the absolute limit. These lenders do not care about the legal nuances of the deed. If he defaults, and he will, they are going to show up at that house to collect. They will go after Maya. A sharp physical pain pierced my chest. My daughter. My sweet, naive Maya was sleeping in a house that had a target painted on its front door. I gripped the edges of the desk so hard my knuckles turned white. I thought we had reached the bottom of his depravity, but Marcus slowly pulled one final piece of paper from his leather briefcase. This is why he came to you demanding the $800,000, Marcus explained, handing me a printout of an airline itinerary and an offshore wire receipt. The net is closing in on him. The loan sharks are calling in their debts. So Liam made a backup plan. I stared at the itinerary. 2 one-way first-class tickets to a sovereign island nation with absolutely no extradition treaty with the United States. The flight was scheduled to depart in exactly 9 days. 2 tickets? I asked, my voice trembling slightly. Marcus sighed heavily. He has been funneling whatever scraps of cash he has left into an untraceable offshore account. And the second ticket is not for Maya. It is for a woman named Chloe. She is 22, an aspiring model he met at one of the VIP clubs. He is planning to take the money you give him, grab the mistress, and vanish across the globe, leaving your daughter utterly alone to face the criminal syndicate he invited into her home. The sheer weight of the maliciousness finally broke me. I slumped back into my chair, burying my face in my hands. A raw, ragged sob tore its way out of my throat. For 10 minutes, the formidable chief executive officer vanished, replaced entirely by a terrified, heartbroken mother. I wept for the years Maya had wasted loving a monster. I wept for the emotional scars this would leave on her soul. I felt a profound, crushing guilt for ever allowing this parasite into our lives, for blinding myself to the truth just to see her smile. Marcus remained perfectly silent, granting me the dignity of my grief. But as the tears soaked into my palms, something shifted inside me. The sorrow began to calcify. The devastation hardened into a block of pure, unadulterated ice. I wiped my face, took a deep breath, and sat up straight. When I looked back at Marcus, there were no tears left in my eyes, only a lethal, calculating calm. "We are going to destroy him," I stated, my voice echoing with a terrifying clarity. "I do not just want him broke. I want him entirely eradicated. I want him in a cage." A slow, dangerous smile spread across Marcus's face. He reached into the very back of his briefcase and pulled out the original real estate contract from 2 years ago. The one I had insisted upon. "I was hoping you would say that," Marcus murmured, tapping his pen against the thick parchment. "Because Liam's arrogance is about to be his ultimate undoing. Let us revisit the hidden commercial forfeiture clause we buried in the property deed." He opened the contract to page 42 and traced his finger along a dense paragraph of legal jargon. The clause clearly states that any proven financial fraud, criminal negligence, or unauthorized encumbrance tied to the property immediately, and without the need for prior judicial review, strips the occupants of all tenant rights and reverts full, uncontested ownership to your holding company. By forging your signature to secure a fraudulent loan against the property, Liam has triggered the clause. He has effectively evicted himself. And the forged signature? I asked, the pieces of the trap rapidly forming in my mind. Wire fraud, bank fraud, identity theft, interstate criminal conspiracy. Marcus listed them off like items on a grocery receipt. It is a federal feast. If we take this to the authorities right now, they will build a case, but he might catch wind and board that flight early. "So, we do not tell the authorities right now," I said, leaning forward, the blueprint of his destruction solidifying. "We prepare the evidence for the Federal Bureau of Investigation. We finalize the property forfeiture, and we give Liam exactly what he wants. A meeting to discuss giving him the money. Marcus's eyes glinted with predatory approval. We let him walk right into the slaughterhouse. Exactly, I replied smoothly. He thinks I'm a vulnerable mother who will pay any price to protect her daughter's marriage. Let us invite him over for dinner and let him believe he has won. I want to see the exact moment the light leaves his eyes. 3 days later, I sent a meticulously worded email to Liam. I kept the tone carefully neutral, adopting the voice of a pragmatic executive who had finally accepted defeat. I wrote that I had reconsidered his terms, that preserving Maya's marriage was my highest priority, and that I wanted to invite them both to my home on Friday evening for a private dinner. The agenda, I stated clearly, was to finalize the paperwork for the $800,000 capital injection and draft the preliminary agreements for his 15% equity transfer. He replied within 10 minutes. A single word. Perfect. Friday evening arrived cloaked in a thick rolling fog that swallowed the hills of my estate. I had the household staff prepare an opulent meal, set the grand dining table with my finest crystal and silver, and then dismissed them for the night. I wanted no witnesses to the bloodbath. I wore a tailored black dress, the kind of armor one wears to a corporate execution, and poured myself a generous glass of vintage red wine. Precisely at 7 o'clock, the heavy mahogany front doors swung open. Liam strolled into my foyer like a newly crowned king inspecting his conquered territory. He was dressed impeccably in a bespoke charcoal suit, his posture radiating a toxic, unbearable smugness. He barely glanced at the magnificent surroundings. His eyes were already scanning the room for his prize. Maya walked silently a few paces behind him. She looked pale and exhausted, her gaze darting nervously toward me as if expecting another explosive confrontation. I offered them a polite, tightly controlled smile and gestured toward the dining room. Please sit down. I appreciate you both taking the time to come. Liam took his seat at the opposite end of the long table, immediately leaning back and interlacing his fingers behind his head. His eyes instantly locked onto the centerpiece of the table. Resting precisely between two silver candelabras was a thick, pristine white envelope secured with a heavy crimson wax seal. It looked official. It looked lucrative. It looked exactly like the surrender he had been anticipating. I have to admit, Everly, I am glad you finally saw reason. Liam began, his tone dripping with patronizing faux magnanimity. He reached for his water glass, swirling it casually. I knew you were a smart woman. Silicon Valley does not reward emotional decisions, and holding a grudge over a simple business disagreement would have been bad for everyone. Family is complicated. Sometimes we clash, and sometimes people make mistakes in the heat of the moment. But at the end of the day, we have to protect our legacy. He was actually lecturing me on family values. The sheer audacity of the man sitting in my home, pretending to be a pillar of virtue while harboring a secret flight ticket for his mistress, was almost mesmerizing. I took a slow, measured sip of my wine, letting the dark liquid coat my throat. You are absolutely right, Liam, I replied smoothly, my voice devoid of any inflection. Protecting the legacy is paramount. And sometimes drastic measures are required to ensure the survival of the family. Maya shifted uncomfortably in her chair, sensing the unnatural stillness in the room. She kept her hands folded tightly in her lap, her eyes fixed on her empty plate. Liam, oblivious to the dropping temperature in the room, let out a soft chuckle. Exactly. We are all on the same team here. Maya and I are building a future, and your support means everything. Once the funds hit the account, I can stabilize the operations, and we can start discussing my integration into your executive board. I have some fantastic ideas for restructuring your marketing department. I set my wine glass down. The sharp clink of crystal against the table echoed loudly. I reached out, placing my fingertips lightly on the edge of the heavy white envelope, and slowly slid it down the polished wood. It glided silently until it came to a halt right in front of Liam. I believe it is time to conclude our business, I said softly. Go ahead. Open it. Consider it the exact reward you have earned for your contributions to this family. A greedy, triumphant grin split Liam's face. He practically snatched the envelope off the table. He broke the crimson seal with a swift flick of his thumb, completely abandoning his sophisticated facade in his eagerness to get his hands on the supposed equity contracts in the cashier's check. I watched his face intently. I wanted to burn this exact sequence of seconds into my memory forever. He pulled out the thick stack of papers. His eyes darted to the top of the first page. The triumphant grin froze. It did not just fade, it shattered. The color drained from his face so rapidly that his skin took on a sickening ashen hue. His mouth fell slightly open and his eyes widened in sheer, unadulterated terror. He blinked rapidly, staring at the bold, unforgiving black letters stamped across the top of the document. It was a federal court summons. Attached directly beneath it was an emergency asset freeze order authorized by a federal judge listing every single bank account associated with his name, his shell companies, and his hidden offshore trusts. His hands began to shake violently. The papers rattled against the table. "What is this?" he stammered, his voice suddenly weak and breathless. "Everly, what is this?" I leaned forward, clasping my hands on the table. The polite hostess vanished, leaving only the ruthless predator he had foolishly underestimated. "That is the end of your pathetic masquerade," I stated, my voice echoing with icy authority. "You thought you could outsmart me. You thought I would hand you a fortune to fund your escape with Chloe. Oh yes, Liam, I know about the 22-year-old model. I know about the 2 one-way tickets departing next week to an island without an extradition treaty." Maya gasped loudly, her head snapping up to stare at her husband. "Chloe," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Liam, what is she talking about?" Liam ignored her, his eyes darting frantically around the room like a trapped animal. He tried to stand up, but his legs seemed to give out and he sank heavily back into his chair. "I also know about the underground gambling debts," I continued, each word striking him like a physical blow. "And most importantly, I know about the $3 million loan you secured by forging my signature on a fraudulent collateral agreement. You triggered the commercial forfeiture clause the second you submitted those fake documents. The house is no longer yours. It never really was." "You cannot do this," he choked out, sweat beginning to bead on his forehead. "You have no proof." "I do not need proof for you." I smiled, a cold, empty expression that offered absolutely no mercy. "Because I am not the one prosecuting you. Every single document detailing your wire fraud, your bank fraud, and your interstate criminal conspiracy is currently sitting on the desk of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. And your assets are frozen. You do not have a single dollar left to your name to buy a plane ticket, let alone hire a defense attorney." The silence that descended upon the dining room was absolute, heavy, and suffocating. Liam sat completely paralyzed, the federal documents trembling in his hands, finally realizing that the woman he thought he had cornered had just flawlessly engineered his total and absolute destruction. 7 weeks later, the grandiose illusions of Liam's life collapsed within the sterile, wood-paneled walls of a San Francisco civil courtroom. The air in the room was thick with tension, smelling faintly of lemon polish and old paper. I sat at the plaintiff's table, my spine perfectly straight, projecting an aura of absolute, untouchable authority. Across the wide center aisle sat the man who had once threatened to burn my entire empire to the ground. Liam was entirely unrecognizable. Without my money to fund his vanity, the polished, bespoke Silicon Valley tech mogul had vanished into thin air. He wore an ill-fitting, off-the-rack gray suit that hung loosely on his shrinking, defeated frame. His skin was sallow, deep, dark circles bruised the fragile skin beneath his frantic eyes, and he kept running trembling fingers through his unkempt hair. Because the federal judge had strictly maintained the emergency asset freeze blocking every single account tied to his name, Liam could not afford the high-powered legal defense team he desperately needed. Instead, he was flanked by a remarkably young, terrified-looking public attorney who seemed completely out of his depth and constantly checked his watch. Marcus Vance stood up. He did not yell, and he did not perform for the gallery. He simply executed his job with the surgical, terrifying precision of an assassin. For 45 minutes, Marcus laid out a devastating, ironclad narrative of fraud, deceit, and gross criminal negligence that left the entire courtroom in stunned silence. First, he submitted the forged promissory note into evidence. He meticulously highlighted the blatant discrepancies in the signature, cross-referencing it with sworn affidavits from 3 independent forensic handwriting analysts. Then, Marcus turned his attention to the extravagant lifestyle Liam had built on my dime. He projected complex financial ledgers onto the large courtroom monitors, detailing the exact, undeniable flow of the hundreds of thousands of dollars I had provided for his imaginary tech startup. The money did not go to servers, marketing campaigns, or software engineers. The gallery gasped softly as the screen displayed wire transfers to dangerous underground gambling syndicates, exorbitant bar tabs at exclusive underground clubs, and lavish hotel suites booked in foreign countries. Finally, Marcus brought out the killing blow. He presented the first-class flight itineraries and the hidden financial records linking Liam directly to a 22-year-old woman named Chloe. Marcus even played a brief, legally obtained audio recording of a voicemail Liam had left for her, promising a life of luxury on a tropical island once he secured one last massive payout from his supposedly gullible mother-in-law. Liam sank lower and lower into his chair, his face buried in his hands, unable to look at anyone. His cheap attorney did not even try to mount a defense or raise an objection. There was absolutely nothing left to defend. The carefully crafted illusion of the visionary entrepreneur was dead, completely destroyed and replaced by the pathetic reality of a desperate thieving con artist. The presiding judge, a stern woman with zero tolerance for white-collar grifters, adjusted her silver glasses and stared down at Liam with blatant, unfiltered disgust. She did not waste time deliberating. She grabbed her heavy wooden gavel and slammed it down with a sharp, echoing crack that made Liam physically flinch in his seat. Based on the overwhelming, irrefutable evidence of fraudulent financial activity and criminal breach of contract, the judge announced, her voice ringing out with finality through the silent room, I find the commercial forfeiture clause executed by the plaintiff to be fully valid and immediately enforceable. The defendant, having utilized the property to secure illegal loans under false pretenses and forged signatures, has forfeited all tenant and ownership rights. Complete and absolute ownership of the Bay Area estate is hereby reverted 100% to Everly Hunters Holding Company. You are ordered to vacate the premises and remove any remaining personal effects within 24 hours, though, judging by your frozen financial assets, I suspect you have nowhere to take them. Liam let out a hollow, suffocating gasp. He had nothing left. No house, no money, no company, no future. But the most powerful moment of the entire ordeal did not come from the judge's bench. It came from the gallery directly behind me. Maya stood up. For years, she had been a quiet shadow, diminished by Liam's relentless psychological manipulation, convinced she was the fragile one who constantly needed his protection and guidance. Now she looked at the ruined man sitting at the defense table, and there was absolutely no fear left in her eyes. The tears were streaming steadily down her cheeks, but her posture was rigid, forged from the exact same iron resolve that had built my entire career. Maya walked slowly and purposefully toward the low wooden divider separating the gallery from the legal tables. Liam looked up at her, his eyes silently begging for a single shred of pity, desperately hoping the emotional grip he had maintained on her for so long still lingered. Maya did not say a single word to him. She simply raised her left hand, grabbed the heavy diamond engagement ring he had purchased using my stolen money, and slid it forcefully off her finger. With a sharp, deliberate flick of her wrist, she threw the ring directly at him. The diamond struck his chest and clattered loudly onto the polished hardwood floor, rolling away into a dark corner. That tiny, sharp sound was the ultimate declaration of her freedom. The mental chains were permanently broken. Court was officially adjourned. Liam stood up, staggering slightly as if the gravity in the room had suddenly doubled. He walked down the center aisle, staring blankly ahead, entirely consumed by the crushing realization that he was walking out into the unforgiving streets of San Francisco as a homeless, penniless outcast. But the severe consequences of his breathtaking arrogance were not quite finished. The moment Liam pushed open the heavy double doors and stepped out into the bustling marble corridor of the courthouse, His path was abruptly and forcefully blocked. 3 large men and 1 woman, all wearing severe expressions and dark windbreakers, stepped seamlessly out of the crowd to surround him. They were federal agents from the Financial Crimes Division. "We have a warrant for your arrest," the lead agent stated, his voice completely devoid of any emotion. He grabbed Liam's shoulder, spinning him around forcefully. Liam did not fight back. He was completely hollowed out, entirely defeated. He simply let his arms fall limp as the agent pulled them roughly behind his back. The sharp, cold, metallic click of the steel handcuffs locking tightly around his wrists echoed off the high marble walls, sounding even louder and more final than the judge's gavel. "You are being charged with multiple federal counts of aggravated bank fraud, identity theft, and interstate wire fraud," the agent recited, reading from a small black notepad. "You have the right to remain silent." I walked slowly out of the courtroom just as the agents began to march him toward the secure freight elevators at the end of the hall. I stopped, crossing my arms over my chest, and watched the man who had tried to destroy my family get led away in heavy chains. People often say that revenge is sweet, that it brings a euphoric, intoxicating rush of triumph. But as I watched Liam disappear behind the thick metal elevator doors destined for a concrete cell, I felt no joy. I did not smile, and I did not gloat. Instead, a profound, absolute stillness settled over my soul. I had not engineered his destruction to win a petty game or to satisfy my own ego. I had done it to surgically excise a toxic, dangerous cancer from my daughter's life. As Maya walked up beside me, wrapping her arms tightly around my waist and resting her head gently on my shoulder, I finally exhaled. The war was officially over. I had protected my most precious asset, and in the end, I knew that was the only victory that truly mattered. Several months passed, and the bitter winter of our lives slowly gave way to a quiet, healing spring. Maya moved back into my home, bringing with her a heavy heart that took time to mend. The first few weeks were filled with long, silent mornings and tears shed in the safety of her childhood bedroom. But as the seasons changed, so did she. Free from the constant, exhausting psychological manipulation she had endured, the vibrant daughter I raised began to return to me. Her laughter, once stifled and rare, started echoing through the hallways again. Seeking a purpose beyond the shadow of her failed marriage, Maya accepted an internship at a local non-governmental organization dedicating her days to helping disadvantaged families. She was finally building a life on her own terms, completely independent of anyone else's ambitions. Eventually, the news we had been expecting made its way into the local papers. Liam was handed an 8-year sentence in a federal penitentiary. There would be no early release, no clever legal maneuvers to save him. Reading that headline brought a profound sense of closure. For Maya and me, his name ceased to be a source of anxiety. He was no longer a threat. He was simply a deeply expensive, painful lesson that we had successfully survived and left behind. That left only one unresolved piece of the past, the sprawling estate in the Bay Area. The property had been the epicenter of Liam's greed, a monument to his lies. Selling it felt too easy, almost like erasing the battle we had fought and won. Instead, I decided to completely rewrite the history of that house. I hired a team to gut the interior, tearing down the lavish, superficial decorations Liam had chosen. We transformed the massive rooms into warm, welcoming offices and safe consultation spaces. The estate officially reopened as a fully funded support center, providing absolutely free legal representation and financial planning for women who had survived economic abuse. We turned the site of our greatest betrayal into a sanctuary for others facing the exact same darkness. On the morning of the grand opening, Maya and I stood side by side on the wide front porch. The California sun cast a brilliant golden light across the newly painted walls. Maya reached over and grabbed my hand, intertwining her fingers with mine. She looked at me, her eyes clear, bright, and completely free of the fear that used to haunt her. "I am so sorry, Mom," she whispered softly, her voice steady and sincere. "I am sorry I was so blind. I should have trusted you sooner instead of defending him." I squeezed her hand tightly and offered her a gentle smile. "There is nothing to forgive, Maya. You loved him and he weaponized that love. You survived, and that is all that matters. Looking at my strong, beautiful daughter, I understood a fundamental truth about motherhood and power. Establishing strict boundaries and refusing to yield to emotional extortion is never an act of cruelty. It is, in fact, the absolute strongest layer of armor that true love can forge. Money can easily expose the darkest parts of a person's nature, but it can never ever buy the right to trample on a mother's dignity. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. We hope you enjoyed it. As an ad-free channel, your support is what keeps us alive. Please support James Revenge Stories with just $1 via the QR code on the screen or click the link in the description box or pinned comment. Also, we would love to connect with you. Please leave a comment telling us which city or state you are listening from. Thank you for standing with us, and see you in the next stories.